Hello, good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. I'd like to just go ahead and welcome all of our participants, and thank you all for joining today. So my name is Sarah Ishag, and I will be one of the moderators along with our CEO of Wall Street Research, Alan Stone. As many of you are probably already familiar with Wall Street Research, we are a 35-year-old research and investor relations consulting firm. We've been running these investor roadshows for quite some time and recently transitioned to the virtual environment, obviously due to the current climate, which has been going pretty well so far. So today we have Advisors Equity Fund, which will be introduced shortly and presented by the manager of the fund, Ed Baker, along with his colleague, Naif Hajjar. This fund is specifically designed and set up to acquire pre-IPO shares in Impossible Foods. So they are opening up this offering to new investors through the fund, in which up to $50 million will be allocated towards the pre-IPO for Impossible Foods. Impossible Foods itself is a fast-growing plant-based meat startup known for their Impossible Burger, which has gained significant traction since the inception of the firm, and it's currently being distributed nationally. In terms of our agenda, following the presentation, Alan will go ahead and present a series of questions prior to opening up the Q&A session. So to all of our participants, if you do have any questions, please feel free to add those as we go along into the chat box, and we will attempt to get through as many as those as possible prior to the end of this call. Also, I'd like to just mention a quick disclaimer. This is a private offering, and it's open to accredited investors only. Most of our participants should fall into that category. However, if you are not considered an accredited investor, we do ask if you can kindly exit the room. So your continued participation is an affirmation that you are an accredited investor. Also, we will be sending follow-up emails directly following the event for those of you who may have serious inquiries regarding the offering. So you may be in touch, directly with us and with the team. And with that being said, I'll go ahead and pass it over to Alan Stone so we can get started.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. And I'd like to welcome everyone who's come on to the virtual webinar here at Wall Street Research. And I'd like to thank our sponsor today, Advisors Equity Fund 2, which is led by Edward Baker and Naif Hajjar. And Ed Baker has a tremendous background in the investment industry, having been the vice chairman and head of the trust department at Piper Jaffray and other leading firms. He's been in the registered investment advisory business for many years, and with Naif's background, having been in investment banking, in his career with leading firms, they've been able to put together a very exciting fund, which is basically acquiring the pre-IPO shares from some existing institutional investors that are shareholders of the Impossible Foods. Impossible Foods is one of the top plant-based meatless burgers. It's sold in many grocery stores and chains nationally, including leading firms like Walmart and Kroger and many other large ones. It's in Starbucks, Burger King, and so forth. So their competitor, which is Beyond Meat, did a very successful IPO last year, back in May last year, and the stock was listed initially at 25. This is the Beyond Meat at $25, and later on that day closed about $65 a share. And today, as we sit here today, it's about $125 a share. So, so those who were fortunate to be in that IPO did really well, and we think that the Impossible Foods will be able to rival the performance of the Beyond Meat, and that's kind of our review, having taken a look at this closely over the last couple of weeks. So at this point, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Ed Baker and Naif Hajjar, and they'll go through a fairly quick PowerPoint and background on the company and their fund, and then we'll do some questions and answers, and then take questions in the chat room. All right, so I'm going to turn it over to Ed. And
thanks, Alan. Okay, everybody. Well, our purpose today is to tell you even more about Impossible Foods, but at the same time, we want to tell you about our fund that's featuring Impossible Foods. Anyway, Impossible Foods' mission is to transform the global food system by replacing animal-based meat with plant-based meat, as Alan mentioned. Their mission, we believe, creates an extraordinary economic opportunity, which I kind of call it a translation into a hyper-growth stock. We believe this will easily be a 10 times return on investment stock in the future. And I would state this is not a wait and see investment opportunity. According to Nielsen data, plant-based meat alternatives grew 25% from July 2019 to July 2020. Impossible Foods is California-based. They started in 2011, but they really did not start their distribution in the USA until more recently. Their immediate focus was Asia. And you might be asking yourself, why Asia? And this is something I've learned in dealing with Impossible. 44% of the world meat consumption is done in Asia. So obviously Asia is a core to Impossible's mission, as well as their business success. Their goal, Impossible, is to be the dominant player in the plant-based sector, but more important, they expect to grow in the animal-based, I would say, industry. It's not a sector. And they have a goal, the CEO has stated that by 2035, they would be the industry leader. Pretty lofty goal for a new company, relatively new. So their success has really been over the last 8 years. They have developed the best taste, the best meat texture, the best meat appearance, and more important, they've got a hamburger type flavor. It looks like, feels like, tastes like a burger. Their real goal was to satisfy that sensory experience that meat lovers crave. Their USA distribution, they started in 2020 with 150 locations. They, in June, July, have grown that to, now they're in Albertsons, Kroger's, over 1,700 of those stores. They're in Publix, which is in the southeast and eastern part of the United States. They've, in July, added Trader Joe's, and as Alan mentioned, they've added Walmart food stores as well. So some big brands, big distribution points. Probably the biggest I felt in July was when they surprised us with the Starbucks coffee. The Starbucks coffee stores that added over 15,000 locations to serve their breakfast sausage sandwich from Impossible. And that's added on top of the 7,500 Burger Kings in the United States that also offer the breakfast sandwich. The CFO, David Lee, had a quote recently: Impossible Food plans to create plant-based alternative for every major meat, animal-based meat category. So we're going to look through some slides now. The slides are going to feature the fund structure, the investors, and the fund goals. There we go. So we are a private equity fund, which I will share a little bit about what that means. As I said, our goal is to have a 500% growth. We want outside returns for our investor members. Next slide, please. What we're doing is pooling investor funds, accredited investors, as Sarah mentioned, and qualified investors. Qualified just are those that are 5 million plus, and accredited are those with $1 million investable assets. We're finalizing our bid on our stock indications with secondary holders. We are not buying the stock from Impossible. We buy the stock from secondary holders. And of course, then we close on the Impossible stock process. Next slide. Yes, our target is 50 million. As I mentioned, we are restricted though, as a private equity fund, we can only have in a Reg D offering 99 accredited and qualified purchaser investors. Next slide. Special purpose investment vehicles, private equity funds, they essentially are LLCs, limited liability companies. So you're buying shares, you'll have a Class A shares into the actual company. Our goal is to maximize value, obviously, but most important, you have a 2-year commitment before you can begin any type of withdrawals into the fund, out of the fund, excuse me. Next slide. Our distribution to investors, the first 100% would be a return of capital. The return of capital would be your invested amount plus a 10% minimum return. After you've gotten 110% of your investment, we start a traditional private equity fund performance fee sharing, 80% to the investors and 20% to the manager. Obviously, in this case, because of the stock we're purchasing, it is preferred stock, but until the board of directors declare dividends, we don't draw on that 8% coupon. So the profits are really going to come in the form of capital gains on the issuer stock. Next slide. This is a chart of unicorn stocks. I'm sure you're all familiar with Apple, especially Tesla today. Dell Computer, I've had a lot of experience as a portfolio manager. Dell was one of those stocks that they go from 20 to 80, 4 to 1 back to 20, run up to 80. I think I personally, in my portfolios, we did at least 4 round trips with them. So great stock to hold. You'll see that we have Beyond, BYND, symbol for Beyond Meats over on the right side of the chart. They're, as Alan mentioned, they're 125 or 5 times multiple of their IPO a year ago. This is probably 25 times where they were on a private placement they had done. You'll notice the blue lines on the Dell, Apple, Tesla. These are showing where the stocks performed beyond their private placements. So clearly you want to be in the blue chart and not in the red. The red's fine, the red's good, but the blue charts is where the real big gains, excuse me, are done from private placements. Next slide. So our first goal is that we're closing the fund in 10 days on September 4th. That's to meet our indications. We've got a bid range of $18 to $22, and that's the range that we've been negotiating at, and we're hopeful that we'll stay in that range. Excuse me, next slide. So as I said, our 2-year goals summarize, and the option you have at the end of year 2 is to either continue in the fund or do a withdrawal. Excuse me. So at this time, while I get a drink of water, I'm going to introduce Naif Hajjar, my joint venture partner. Naif and I have done projects together over the years. He's going to talk about capital markets history, valuation, IPO, and a little more on the Impossible history. Naif, please take it.
thing, Ed. And thank you for that. It was informative. Basically, yeah, I'll start out with a bit of the, a little bit of history, just to expand on some of what Alan and Ed were just talking about. To talk about Impossible's history is really to talk about the CEO, Patrick Brown. Basically, the genesis of it was that he took an 18-month sabbatical. Not a lot of people are familiar with this, but he took an 18-month sabbatical, 2009. Where he basically wanted to figure out what he was going to do with the rest of his career. Frankly, it was just the long story short, is that at the end of that 18 months, he was absolutely convinced that basically meat is just a massive environmental problem. And he began putting all of his energy, all of his efforts towards making a team, basically to identify exactly what it is that makes meat, well, meat, really, so that they could find a better answer for it environmentally and sustainably. So that's effectively how the company was born. And I believe, as far as what Alan was saying, they were official in about 2011, but it was probably about 5 years in 2016 before they were launching and selling some of those, some of the burgers and what have you, and doing so successfully. Now, to switch over to a little bit about their capital markets and that activity, Impossible Foods has raised upwards of $1.5 billion privately, and the valuations of the firms, basically, it's been as high and higher than 4 billion. So effectively, from their start in a relatively short amount of time, we're looking at some real good growth as far as their valuations, what have you. To expand a little bit further about that, on the subject of valuations, often I'm asked, and as well as asked, what we think is an appropriate valuation for Impossible Foods. It's easy to point at the last raise and say that that's the easy answer, about 4 billion, and that's a fair answer too, and sort of a political answer. But maybe what might be fair to consider is the timeline. So if you're looking at your timeline, as far as this being an investment, we're looking at a long timeline. This isn't something that after an IPO or an event that we're going to be immediately out of. This is something that's long term for us. So if we're looking at it that way, we think that a $4 billion, even a $5 billion valuation is really cheap. Some of the prospects that they have, with everything that they've done in terms of their growth, I mean, this is a company that could be easily 10 times more valuable, and that doesn't necessarily include an IPO. If we're talking about an IPO, I'm not a representative at Impossible Foods, of course not, but just one guy's opinion. They're talking about, and again, this was something that earlier Ed had mentioned with the CFO. He was asked very directly, what do you think about an upcoming IPO or what have you? And he was a little bit dodgy, which is totally fair. And he said that they're exploring every option that they can reasonably for funding. Additionally, earlier in the year, you had the CEO, Pat Brown. He was asked the same exact question, and he said that basically they needed to expand more. Now, they kind of have already done that since he was asked that question. So really, who knows? I mean, I believe he said something to the effect of, we need to expand at least twofold before we start entertaining an IPO. And as Ed was saying, we went from about 150 locations to now even just Starbucks alone is about 15,000. Walmart over 8,000. So really, I don't think it's going to be tomorrow but I don't think it's going to be after next year either. So with Impossible and unlike other companies, they have so far and historically, they've basically under-promised and over-delivered. And the bottom line to that is that I think that there could be two outcomes here. Basically, very realistic ones. I think that we could get surprised before the end of the year, and that could be an announcement of something or a filing. And keep in mind, you have some time. You have, I believe, about a year once you file to go public. So that could be one potential scenario, a bit of a surprise in that before the end of the year. But maybe the second possibility, and again, this is just my opinion here, is that after the first quarter of next year, we might start hearing some rumors that the sort of basically time is going to tell us here. I think and frankly, it could just be that in the one scenario, seemingly out of nowhere, you have an announcement and a filing, and the other, we start hearing some whispers, and all of a sudden, maybe a little bit of time passes, and you've got a registration, and it wasn't as big of a surprise, but it happens a little bit later. Basically, that could also be before, obviously, before the end of 2021. So again, time is basically going to tell in terms of when that could happen. But frankly, the benefit with us here is that they're really, as far as the people that are out there that are focused on this company, and frankly, there aren't too many funds that are focused only on Impossible Foods. There aren't too many people that have their finger on the pulse as we do. What we're doing again, as Alan was mentioning, is bidding as a group for the stock to get the best possible pricing, and obviously just being involved the way that we are without having to manage a sea of other companies, and having a focus of Impossible Foods really allows us to focus and have, as to say it again, our finger on the pulse of this company. So that's a bit of our forte, and that's what I wanted to extend to you. And I'd like to actually take a moment to check back with Ed. Ed, are you there?
Okay, thanks, Naif. Very good. Well, I'd like to share with you now my own personal experiences. Started in 2019 with Impossible Foods, with alternative-based meat. And my wife doesn't eat meat. She started this maybe 10 years ago. She does eat fish, but she is a great cook. And so she is the one that got us focused on alternative meats. And really back over a year and a half ago, Beyond Meat beef was probably the best alternative we could find out there. So she did chili cook-offs, we did meatloaf cook-offs, she did burger cook-offs with our large extended family, and just to see how people would react. Personally, I couldn't tell the difference in the chili for sure. So again, the plant-based, the alternative works. But better yet, in this past spring, they've introduced me to Impossible Foods. And that's how we created this joint venture opportunity. And I became I dug pretty deep into Impossible Foods, and then we started doing the taste test. We found them immediately. In our opinion, there is no comparison. Impossible has the best taste. It's obvious why they win all the taste tests. So recently, I did a barbecue, and I had a lot of friends over, and I waited till dessert before I told them that the only burger we served tonight was from Impossible. And I have to tell you, I had some surprised people. One was an investor who was really pleasantly surprised that I didn't tell everybody else what they were eating. They were telling me what a great burger cook I was on the grill and all that good stuff, and the meat was great. So bottom line is, you got to try it yourself. You'll find out. I have to admit, I've never been a person to go to Burger King. until Impossible and to get the Impossible Whopper. So started with that. I thought it was as good or better than a regular Whopper. I ordered it the same way I normally would order a burger. And then when the sausage sandwich came out and that was announced, we started buying that at Burger King. And so we have a Burger King fairly close to us. So we have Impossible breakfast sandwich at least 1 to 2 times a week. And of course, then we were really elated to find Starbucks. Starbucks uses a different bread and really like the Starbucks version of the Impossible sausage sandwich. My prediction, this personal prediction, I think the sausage is going to be a really big hit, big winner all in all. So I said at the opening, we believe Impossible is a hyper growth stock, easily could be a 10 times plus return on investment. And please, you should act now. This is not a wait and see investment opportunity. So with that, I want to thank you all for your attention for Naif and me today. And Alan, we'll turn it over to you for questions.
Thanks, Ed. I have a series of questions I'm going to ask, and then Sarah's going to open up for questions in the chat room from the audience. So let me just go quickly from some of my questions. I think you probably hit on a few of them during your remarks. I see that the company was originally started in 2011 and really got going, appears to be about 4 years ago. And how would you say that it stands in the industry today? Is it number 2 behind Beyond Meat? I think you mentioned in your goals that it's going to be the leader within the next decade. So maybe you could address that.
Well, that was my opinion regarding the market leader. Because they are a private company, we don't have their sales results. We do know what Beyond's sales results are because they are a public company. They've raised 1.5 billion in capital, and over almost 50% of that has been in the last 2 capital raises. They did a Series F, Series G. The Series F they did in March of this year for 500 million, and then they announced 2 weeks ago they raised another 200 million. So Alan, to answer your question, they've raised a lot of money to be able to develop the product, if you will, the taste. They've captured and spent most of their early years doing that. They're just recently, what I was trying to emphasize is 2020, they set up all these distribution points. They had 150 when we started the year in January of 2020. And here we are 8 months later, 7 months later, and they're into the thousands. I mean, if you total them up, 15, 20,000, we got 40,000 different distribution points. So I think the real numbers, financial numbers for Impossible will be what they do from July through December of this year and going into next year. I reported on the Nielsen data on alternative meat sales. That's obviously from retail stores. That's not from manufacturers, I'm pretty sure. And there's a 25% increase just from summer of 2019 to summer of 2020. So that's a pretty extensive and pretty large increase in 1 year. So to answer your question, as far as on their sales, we don't know the exact sales. We know they spent a lot of time on developing product, developing distribution, and it's been like a tidal wave since the month of April, May, June, July. Every month we had more and more distribution points. And when I went to graduate school, that's what they taught us: distribution, 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 location, location, location. They seem to be positioning themselves. And then they have that overall goal to take market share away from the animal-based industry beyond the plant-based. So those are just some comments on that question.
Sure. Yeah, thank you very much. Now, I understand that maybe you could talk a little bit about how they came up with the concept of the plant-based alternative to meat. I understand that their CEO, Pat Brown, had been professor of biochemistry at Stanford University Medical School. So I guess he's probably the visionary for the company who kind of invented the product. And maybe do they have any intellectual, proprietary intellectual property as a result of that?
Naif, I think you should take that one.
I'm happy to talk on that. And you're absolutely right. Pat Brown, the CEO, once again, biochemist. He's still professor at Stanford. And as far as their proprietary technology, the basic element of their their product is what they call heme, which is short for forgive my pronunciation, but it's leg hemoglobin. And that's what gives meat that a distinct flavor, and frankly it's present in their using only plants. It is present in their product. So that's their distinction between frankly everybody else. And yes, again, that Pat Brown is the visionary here in terms of who put that together and what have you. Beyond doesn't have that. I'm not saying anything negative about the product, but they don't have that, and the difference has been categorically that the taste with Impossible Foods, again, what Ed was saying, has been outpacing just about everybody else on the market. So that's a major distinction there.
Yeah, very good. I was in, actually yesterday, I went to Starbucks down the street from where I live and in Los Angeles, and I was able to try one of the breakfast sandwiches, which I guess was the sausage, and it had a egg in there and some cheese. So it was really very, very good and very filling, and I'm glad I was able to try it, and I could see how they're going to do great with all the locations that they're in. I understand from some of the articles I've been reading that they have a number of celebrity investors in the company. Some celebrities include Jay-Z, Katy Perry, Serena Williams, Trevor Noah. Maybe you can talk a little bit about their investors overall and who some of the big VC funds are that have participated in the earlier rounds.
Yeah. I can take that one, even though I'm not really much of a celebrity buff, but the list goes beyond those names. Some of them I'm not terribly familiar with, but apparently a lot of people are. And with just a simple a quick search, you can find out A to Z who's involved. But one name I think really just stands apart, and it's Bill Gates. Everybody knows that name. I don't have to go any further into who he is, but frankly, having with Impossible Foods, having him as an investor, I just think that that speaks for itself. And frankly, rain or shine, I think just having that name, having him and his enterprise be involved in the company is like this this insurance policy, if you will, that it's really just I feel like it's just a key to their success. The networks that he has, obviously it's no secret how wealthy he is. I don't think the guy will ever let anything bad happen to the company. So if there's one name as far as the celebrities that sticks out from a financial and a business viability standpoint, I think it's Bill Gates. Not to say anything about anyone else in that list, but he's also been more in front of the proverbial camera with Impossible Foods than some of these other names. So I think that if there's one to highlight in our short amount of time today, I think it's Bill Gates as far as the celebrities.
That's fantastic. Now, I think you mentioned that the valuation in the last round was about 4 billion, and from what I could determine, that's about $16.15 per share on the Series G round. And maybe you could talk a little bit about, I guess the Beyond Meat is trading at a valuation of about double that in the public markets now. So seems to be, priced reasonably and geared up for a good launch, as an IPO next year. And maybe you can tell us a little bit about this private offering, and if someone participates in this fund, what happens, and then how do they, wind up in the IPO and have, a liquidity event when the stock is listed?
Yeah, excellent question. And I see some of the questions that are populating in relation to that. So I hope I can at least cover them before we officially open for the Q&A. But as just a quick recap, you're absolutely right. It was a $4.03 billion valuation in that last $200 million round, and right on the money, 16.15 per share. And just to mention something from earlier, we haven't purchased shares yet. The idea for us is to come in and pool the funds and be able to put a bid in with our relationships to be able to lock in and take advantage of the best possible pricing as a whole, rather than some of any other avenues of approach that would be doing that individually for each individual investor. So we believe that to be a big advantage versus doing it the other way, and we think that we can ideally we'd be able to get the best possible pricing again versus that other way. So that's our approach. The other thing is, more or less, we've already begun to do this. Obviously, we've begun to pool our funds. We've had some initial talks in order to acquire the stock. And again, I see some of the other questions were about whether or not we'll be participating, as a banker and what have you. That isn't the intention at all. Ed mentioned earlier our goal is about $50 million. We don't know for certain, but we don't believe that that's going to be, even close to what the offering would likely be, if it's even anything like Beyond. So I hope I touched on a couple of those points and maybe answered some of the questions to the panel.
Sure. I think you mentioned earlier in your remarks about the growth of the industry in general and the plant-based meatless product. And from what I've read, seems as though that sector of the industry has grown about 42% in the last 3 years. So that's pretty rapid growth, and may even grow faster in future years as more people just become aware of the products that are on the market. So any further comments on that?
Yeah, I think it's important to point out that the plant-based industry, by comparison to the animal-based industry, the meat industry there, is tiny. And 40% growth on something that's relatively small is good, but quite frankly, it has plenty more to go if we're looking at the meat space overall. Just some coarse numbers. You're talking about a $1.5 trillion industry, and I don't mind saying this aloud. Pat Brown wants to eradicate the need to use animals as food. Now maybe that's altruistic, maybe it isn't, but we can do some simple math here. If Impossible Foods becomes, and I think that they're already looking like the chief contender, if they become the authority on this foray, on this mission, and they capture
That's great. Yeah, I mean, let me just ask, because I want to be able to get to some of the people in the chat room are asking questions. Let me just wrap up this way. Ed, maybe you could tell us a little bit about your background, Ed, about your registered investment advisory and this offering. And I know one of the questions that came in was about the minimum investment in this offering. So maybe you could address that, and then I'll turn it over to Sarah and let her address the questions in the chat room.
Okay, Alan, sounds good. Well, my background, I ran the trust company, as you mentioned, for Piper Jaffray. I started it for them. We were $1 billion plus assets there. I was the chief investment officer. I did create common trust funds that were used for both institutional investors as well as our individual trust clients. I've done mutual funds, registered investment companies, which are known more as open-end mutual funds. And then I've done Reg D offerings like the one we're doing here, private placements. The minimum investment is $50,000. We obviously we can only have 99 investors, so we hope not to have too many at the minimum level, and expect to get a lot more of the qualified purchaser level of investors. As Naif mentioned, we are pooling the investments. I saw some questions coming up about price per share. We don't know what the total price will be, but our use of proceeds will definitely be used towards buying Impossible stock. Our goal is to share in the profit sharing of the funds, and that's to get all investors their 110% of their investment back, and then share in those profits. That's the big reason we're doing all of this. Next question, or do you want to turn it over to Sarah?
Yeah, I'm going to turn it over to Sarah now.
Yeah, thank you, Alan. And thank you, Ed and Naif, for the presentation. Yeah, you covered quite a bit of questions. We did have some overlaps, especially with the question regarding the minimum investment. But we have a few questions, actually, so I'll go ahead and try to get through those. So, Naif, I believe you mentioned earlier that one of the differentiators between Beyond Meat and Impossible Burger. We have someone interested in knowing a little bit more about, what is the advantage or differentiator between the two, if you want to elaborate on that. And in addition to that, he's concerned about the company being focused on growth rather than profit. Any idea as to when Impossible will be profitable?
Yeah, excellent question. One sort of hot topic about the differentiation of the two is GMO. Frankly, some people think that there's a bit of a negative connotation with that, and that's understandable if you dive into the subject a little bit. And to just tackle it sort of head on, Impossible Foods is a genetically modified. Their product is genetically modified, but it isn't exactly in the same facet or the same way that it became a negative connotation. It is merely done in such a way that and again, I'm not making a claim on behalf of Impossible Foods, but it is safe. There isn't anything that involves any sort of hormones or pesticidal injections into the product itself. And they're not really concerned about GMO as far as their products. There are other, and again, I'm not naming names, there are other places where that might be a concern, for a consumer, for somebody literally just consuming that particular product, but that doesn't apply to Impossible Foods product. So that's one that's kind of, as I mentioned, it's been a topic of discussion, and some people are worried that that could be a barrier to entry, or at least a concern for some people who see, that Beyond or whomever else it is has non-GMO on as a label, but as far as the product is concerned, it kind of doesn't really apply here. That the fear of a GMO isn't necessarily impact. It doesn't have anything to do with Impossible's product. Now, I'm not the biochemist, but I'm again just kind of speaking on based on what I've understood from Pat Brown and frankly his team. So that's one of the big advantage, or at least one of the big questions as far as the differentiation.
Thank you. Thank you for that. So thanks for clarifying that. Can you touch a little bit on earnings per share, projected multiplier, and also we have a question from Gary about where you're getting the shares for the fund. Is it guaranteed that you can access those shares?
So we can take those one by one. As earnings per share, I mean, again, Ed was discussing how this is it's a private company. You're not really going to find too many numbers out there as far as their earnings. What is out there is about 2 years ago they did 90 million. I saw about 130 last year and projections for over 200 this year, but there isn't, they're under no obligation to actually report it like a public company would. The one important thing to I guess to point out is that the earnings are important, of course. We think that given their new relationships that they're going to blow that out of the water. I mean, if they did 90 million with less than 100 relationships out there, and now we're knocking on the door of 25, 30,000 relationships, I don't know. I highly doubt it'll be 90 million again. Okay, so the bottom line is what they've done with what they've raised and what they've generated in revenue. They've spent a significant amount on R&D. I mean, last I checked, it was north of 330 million in research and development, and that was clearly to get the product tasting as good and in many cases better than every other one that's out there. But secondly, and this is an important one, I see this as one of the questions there. Secondly, in order for them to be able to increase their margins, and third, so that they can get the price, they reduce their prices by 15%, and their expectation. Again, this is I'm not speaking on behalf of the company, but their expectation is that they want to reduce it more to the point where you're not looking at well, beef is this much less expensive, and Impossible or whatever, Impossible is this much more. They want it to not be an issue. So that if they remove that, and obviously if they remove that, and the taste is the same, maybe even better, then why take the animal product? Why, that's their belief. So I think that they're doing that very well. I think they're on the cusp of having better margins, and frankly, that I'm a big fan of that. I mean, I've had my share of beef. I'm not a devout vegan or anything like that, but I simply think if we don't have to eat an animal, then why should we, right?
Yeah, okay, so we have a few questions. I think for the last question, you still didn't clarify if you have any idea as to when Impossible will be profitable, or if you can kind of touch on that.
When they will be profitable, is that what you said?
Yeah. Do you have any idea when Impossible will be profitable or any,
Well, I think there was two questions like that. Someone else asked, if this is a hyper-growth company, are they concerned about profitability? Which, that's a good question. They've raised a lot of capital. As I said, they've raised over 40% of it just this year. This is after they've done all the development of the products. So they're clearly positioning themselves for more expansion. And I would assume we're going to start seeing more advertising on their part. You got to let people know that they're in all these locations. How soon do they want to do an IPO? How soon do they need to do an IPO? They aren't motivated the same as probably all the investors are, but they've been able to draw attention from some very significant institutional funds that they've been able to do all their investments without paying broker commissions anywhere. So they're clearly in a good spot, as Naif mentioned, having Bill Gates as one of your lead investors early on. Bill Gates is big on the whole economy, or excuse me, the ecological benefits of the green, the gases and all that stuff, the water. He's right in there with the CEO. Naif and I we're investors. We would like to see the numbers. I had one of my investors even say to me, Ed, you've been a chief investment officer. How can you do this without knowing their numbers? I said, well, what do you want me to do? I can't get them. If I could get them, I would. I know there are certain investors who can, but I know there's a lot more investors who don't even have their performance. So they don't have to tell us. Are they gonna broadcast? Oh, gee, we're gonna file that S1 pretty soon now. No, that's why we're more ourselves. Our sense of urgency is right now. We're going to raise as much capital for our investors to pool together so we can make very good institutional type buys for the shares. And that's the purpose of the funds. I think somebody asked, what's the use of the funds? The use of the funds are to buy the Impossible stock. We feel we can tell you other stocks that we really like, Elon Musk companies. There's some others that we really like, but right now we feel that can wait. Impossible is immediate. It felt like every day something new over the last 3 months, they were doing an announcement. So they're positioning themselves well. Their motivation to do an IPO will be simply when they reach the point they can't raise private capital as easily as they can now. And their investors are going to start getting restless. Some of them have been in it for 9 years now. So at some point, you kind of got a lot of audiences so that there's nobody knows when they'll do the IPO. All I've heard from one investor told me that with the last 200 million they raised in 2 weeks ago, it's probably a good bet that it won't be before 2021. But who knows? We absolutely, sir, don't know. Anybody says they do would be, well, they'd be highly speculating. So hope that answers some of those questions.
We have a couple of questions in regards to the IPO shares also. So I have one question from Nick that says, describe the secondary investors from which you will acquire. Are they investors which have been in previous private rounds?
That was to Naif, right?
Yeah, I mean, either one of you can take the question.
I actually didn't quite hear it all. Could you either repeat or
so the question is, talk a little bit about the secondary investors. Are these investors, the investors that you had in previous rounds? So he said, describe the secondary investors from which you will acquire. Are they investors which have been in previous private rounds?
Well, frankly, I don't want to neglect any answer, but we don't really discuss too many details about anybody who has invested already. But we can say we do have one or more that have been involved in previous rounds. That is a yes.
Okay. And will an investor hold IPO shares directly in Impossible Foods once they invest, obviously, or will the fund hold those shares on behalf of the investor and then redeem those shares upon investor request after the 2-year hold period?
Okay, Sarah, I'll take that one. The investors will own stock in the fund, which is an LLC. The primary asset of the LLC will be Impossible stock. When Impossible does an IPO, they have the option of allowing current investors to their private placement type holders to participate. Usually you see that around 10, 12%, or they may not. If they don't, then we all fall under Rule 144 for the SEC, which simply just states that we are already investors, so the IPO investors get 6 months before we can sell shares. Of course, most of the audience probably is aware, the management has 12 months under Rule 144. So then the stock, post-IPO, post-Rule 144, our objective is to maximize the gain on the stock. And that's just going to be, we'll have to watch and see how the stock performs after the IPO. For all that matter, we've heard speculation it could be a Dutch auction like Google did. Well, if they gain that much popularity and have the ability to do like Google did, that's probably better for the company if they can pull that off. That remains to be seen whether that happens. The stock, you stay in the fund at least 2 years before you can start any withdrawal. When you do a withdrawal, you can request an in-kind withdrawal, which, Sarah, that just means that instead of selling stock to get to do a distribution, we can actually deliver shares of the asset equivalent to what the distribution is. So that's 2 ways. That'd be the way to get the stock directly for somebody who wants to be a long-term holder and doesn't want to stay in our fund for our next opportunity. So hope that answered all your questions.
Yeah, that answered most of them. We did have quite a bit of questions. A few people are wondering about the, sending over the offering document, if you would be open to doing that.
Well, I believe Alan is sending a letter to everyone, and that instructions for all that, that process will be part of the letter.
Yes, let me just follow up on that, Ed. Shortly after this call, it'll probably be tomorrow, everyone who registered will get a follow-up letter thanking them for their participation today, and also with a little question, if you'd like further information on the offering, to let us know. You can just click on a response there, and we'll make sure that Ed and Naif get you the documents for the offering. And you'll also be getting a copy of the video replay as well. So even the people that weren't able to come on the call today, if they registered, they'll be able to listen to the call. So that's our follow-up process. And anyone's welcome to communicate directly with me as well. And we'll get your questions back to Ed. Were there any other, we're coming on an hour now. We've got 1 minute left. So
there's one last question, Alan, if you want to cover it from Kevin.
Yeah, we'll take one more question if you want to grab that, Sarah.
Yeah, there's quite a bit of questions, but I'm glad that you mentioned the follow-up information. So this one is from Kevin. He wants to know, who is the investor that is selling, and is the investor selling at a discount to the previous round to reflect the market dislocation? Well,
first of all, we aren't disclosing our sources of who we're buying the stock from. Nice try. Okay. Second, a discount to what? They're not selling at a discount. They're selling at a, if we buy in the range of $18 to $22, we're buying at a premium of the last valuation at $16. Our sources obviously have a lot of stock, and they've had stock at various raises and various prices. So there's really, we're not interested in how much money they're making. We're more interested in getting as much money raised so we could get the best possible price for our partners in the fund. So.
Okay.
Thank you for that, Ed. Yeah, so we did have a lot of questions, but I'll go ahead and pass it. Yeah, it's good. I mean,
but Sarah, should we have a process to, if we didn't get some of the questions, we have a way of answering directly to those people?
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can
Okay.
go through these questions and make sure that we, you know, get in touch with those, because there's a few questions that we didn't cover, but for the most part, we covered as many as we could given the time allocated. But I'll go ahead and pass it over to Alan so we can wrap it up. And yeah, so thank you for that. Thank you for answering those questions, and thanks to all our participants for your participation as well.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. So yeah, I'd just like to say that we really appreciated having Ed Baker and Naif Hajjar, you know, with us today from their fund, from Advisors Equity Fund 2. They just closed a very successful round with the Fund 1, and hoping that a bunch of our followers who go to our road shows and view us virtually will be able to have the opportunity to participate in this offering. And so let us know of your interest. As we mentioned, there'll be a follow-up call, and you'll get a follow-up letter tomorrow. And at that point, I think, Ed, any further remarks?
No, thank you, Helen, for the opportunity. And I just hope we can have a chance to answer anyone's questions who felt like they didn't. And sounds like you've got that handled. And we'll be hearing from those people that are interested in participating with us after you send out your letter later today, tomorrow, I guess. So thank you again.
All right, thank you, Ed. Thank you, Naif, and thanks, Sarah. And I wish everyone a pleasant day ahead and success in the market.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.